Hello, it's me, Greed here. Listen, I want to talk about something important, okay? I want to talk about why certain things feel like garbage to play against. So, let's start with addressing skill ceiling, because a lot of people don't fully understand what it is. Basically, let's look at it this way. Let's say you've got a graph, and we'll say this is skill ceiling slash floor, right? Depending on how high this bar is depending on the maximum value you can achieve by hitting the top or the bottom. Now, a skill floor doesn't always have to work like this. Sometimes a skill ceiling and a skill floor can work like this, where this part of the hero is inaccessible to the players that aren't able to reach at least the bottom level of the skill floor. Something like Doomfist would have something like this, where he is difficult to play, and therefore anyone in this region will have a hard time playing him because they aren't hitting the absolute bare minimum. Let's get into why things are frustrating to play against. Let's look at a hero like Hanzo. He's a great example of this. So we'll actually just label this. We'll say this is Hanzo. We'll say this is skill ceiling slash floor. And we'll say this is his skill ceiling and his skill floor. Relatively accessible, but has a lot of potential. Then we have the risk factor, and then we have value. When you are playing Hanzo at his absolute skill ceiling, you are incurring a lot of risk on Hanzo for a lot of potential value. And the reason for that is because as a Hanzo player, you are of the understanding that your projectile is relatively slow, meaning you have to take very aggressive angles to close the distance on things so that you're actually able to consistently land a shot. It's easier for a Hanzo to kill a guy who's here than it is for him to kill a guy who's here. So the Hanzo has to play a corner or something like this so that he can actually peek in and out and shoot a target like this. Therefore, a really good Hanzo player that is on said aggressive angle would have to be playing, if he's playing here at his skill ceiling, he has to then incur this much risk because he becomes more diveable due to the fact that he's on a more aggressive angle. And because he's incurring more risk, he has more potential value because that's just how hero design should be. The riskier a play is, the more potential value you should get off of it, in some cases. Here's where things get a little bit different, because Hanzo also has a skill floor. So if you play him at his absolute skill floor, his minimum, you are incurring minimal risk. Not a lot at all, because you're typically just going to be playing inside of your team, and inside of your team you tend to be very safe. Now here is the biggest problem with Hanzo's design, is that even though he's played at his skill floor, and he is incurring minimal risk due to that, his value is still potentially very high due to the fact that he has something called Storm Arrow, where basically he can just stand and shoot the tank hero all day, and that is all he has to do to gain potentially a ton of value. So as you can see, this looks pretty unhealthy. You have a hero that can be played at their skill floor for minimal risk, but potentially high value. And that is why Hanzo is annoying. For example, if you ever play against a good Hanzo player that's taking his aggressive off angles, and he's flanking or doing things like that, and he's playing at his skill ceiling, he's not that annoying. People typically don't get annoyed when he does that. People get annoyed when he stands in the middle of his team, spamming endlessly, and gets a lucky headshot. That is why people find him annoying. Let's try a different example, okay? Let's ignore Hanzo for a second, okay? Let's look at another hero. One that does not follow that same trend. Let's look at Tracer. You have your skill ceiling slash floor. Tracer is of the highest in the game. Actually, this is not a very fair representation. She has a very high skill ceiling, but she is hard to access. So then this is dead space. We'll do that in another color. So, that's Tracer. High skill ceiling, but a very also high skill floor, meaning the hero is hard to access. Now here is where it gets really fascinating. We're going to look at the risk factor of playing Tracer. Playing the hero at their absolute skill ceiling has a lot of risk. And the reason for that is because you're closing a lot of distance, you're taking a lot of fights, you have a lot of potential to get spammed out, die, burn too many resources, something like that. So in order to get your value on Tracer, you must play at your skill ceiling, incur the risk, earn the value. That is how you play Tracer, and that is why very, very few people, outside of like super noobs, complain about Tracer, because Tracer is fair. If you want to get your value, you must play with risk. A Tracer playing at the skill floor has minimal risk, but also very little value, because of the fact they're not closing distance on targets, making it so their damage output isn't enough to actually be relevant. Therefore, if you play at the skill floor, your risk is lower, and therefore your value is lower, which is why Tracer is excellently designed, and why very few people actually complain about it. Now that is very important when we get into our next two heroes, okay? So we're looking at Doomfist. We have his skill ceiling and his skill floor. Doomfist, again, very difficult to access, but a big skill ceiling. He has his risk factor, and he has his value factor. So, Doomfist incurs a lot of risk, almost more than anyone in the game when he does something. But he also has the potential to get a lot of value. Now, here is the biggest problem with Doomfist, because this looks relatively healthy. You played the skill ceiling, you incur a lot of risk, you get your value. It's not perfect, but it's good. It's good enough. However, this is not how Doomfist's floor to ceiling works. The way Doomfist's skill ceiling works is that when Doomfist is played at his skill ceiling, the absolute best way you can play him, with all the crazy text, the rollouts, all of that, all the really good mechanical skill, everything, you are obviously going to be incurring a lot of risk when you do that, because you're in all the time. You're performing very mechanically difficult techs, your engagement timing has to be perfect, there are a lot of factors that can fuck over a Doomfist in his engage. So you are incurring this much risk at his skill ceiling. That is good. If you're going to play at the skill ceiling, you must incur risk. That's important. However, when Doomfist does this, you would assume that his value would then be comparable to his skill ceiling and risk. But it isn't. He's one of the only heroes in the game where his value at his skill ceiling is very low. And the reason for that is called EMP, Empowered Punch. This is the reason Doomfist sucks. The reason for that is because the best way to get value out of Doomfist is by relying on your Empowered Punch. How do you get Empowered Punch? You press the block button and they shoot your block. You then punch someone into a wall, it will stun them, and then you shoot them with your gun. That is the best way to get a kill on Doomfist. Notice how I didn't say it involved some crazy mechanic, or some tech, or a rollout, or something difficult, or great positioning, or something like that. It's because it doesn't. The problem with Doomfist is that this is his skill ceiling to skill floor. This, when he's played at his floor, he still incurs a lot of risk, but his value is way higher. This is completely fucked. This is terrible. And the reason for that is because the best way to play Doomfist, like I said, is Empowered Punch. Empowered Punch does not require any skill at all. Because look at it this way. All you do is push a button to block, they shoot your block, you get Empowered Punch, you then are incurring the risk of charging your punch, you are then punching someone into a wall and shooting them until they die, because they're stunned and they can't do anything. So, you do nothing that requires any skill, you still incur a lot of risk because you can get stunned out of it, but you get a shitload of value because you're punching someone into a wall that's stunning them and shooting them. This is fucked, and the reason people hate Doomfist, because it's not fun to play against this and then get this in return. That's bullshit. The way you fix this is you get rid of EMP. It sucks. That would mean that if you play him at his skill floor, you no longer get this free value because you don't rely on the Empowered Punch. You would cut his value to something more in line with his skill floor, and you would make him more fun to play against. It would also mean that playing him at his skill ceiling could be more valuable if they buffed him to allow for him to do that, but as of right now, it doesn't work. So again, let's look at a couple of more heroes and go over why it's so annoying to play against some characters. Let's look at Kiriko. This is an egregious offender. Now, Kiriko can be played very easily at the skill floor, but they have a relatively high skill ceiling with their kunais. However, this is the biggest issue with Kiriko, is that no matter what you are doing, you are almost certainly never incurring any risk, no matter what. At your skill ceiling, you incur minimal risk. At your skill floor, you basically incur zero risk. Now that's really important to understand, because it means that playing at your skill ceiling and potentially getting this much value is annoying, because the way you actually beat someone playing at their skill ceiling would be abusing the risk factor that it takes to get that value in the first place by playing at the skill ceiling. However, you can't kill a Kiriko playing at her skill ceiling because she has minimal risk factor, which makes her very annoying. She has too much free value. TP and Suzu being one of them. Also, the fact her hitbox is extremely tiny and she's so good at dueling are big reasons for this. Because of the fact that you incur zero risk due to the fact you've got Suzu and TP to get out, it means that playing at your absolute skill floor is insanely valuable, but you're able to carry games way easier because you have minimal risk. And that's a problem with a lot of the supports. Let's look at Moira. This is one of the most egregious examples in the game. The character doesn't have a very high skill ceiling, but has a very accessible skill floor. They have borderline zero risk because they have Fade, yet their value is potentially very high if played properly. And the reason for that is because if you're playing the team play style of Moira, where you're keeping everyone alive, and you're IGLing typically, or you're calling, and you're coordinating plays and such, you could potentially get a lot of value on Moira by just keeping your team alive and going for the right targets. It is valuable. It's not as valuable as, say, a Kiriko, but it is valuable. However, you incur minimal risk due to the fact that you're so survivable on Moira. She's one of the only characters in the game that almost certainly never needs to get peeled because she can just save herself. She doesn't need her team to come back for her. She can save herself. And this is really annoying because you can be terrible at Moira, even just playing them at their skill ceiling, which is minimal, and yet getting a lot of value simply due to the fact that they are so accessible in the first place. This is even more annoying than something like a Kiriko, because at least in the Kiriko example, you can be playing them at this high level, and they can be getting rewarded equally. It just sucks that they don't get any risk. And now we get to the point of the video. When you are designing a hero in a game, you need to make it so that their ceiling slash floor is very far apart. You want a really high skill ceiling and a really low skill floor. That means that if a player joins the game, they have the accessibility to start down here and work their way up gradually up to the skill ceiling as they improve. It's more progression, it's more fun. However, you have to make sure that the risk value and just value in general scale equally to this. You cannot have the risk growing or the value growing at significantly different rates, because then you get absolute dog shit like Kiriko, who incurs essentially zero risk, but their value is insanely high, and their skill ceiling slash floor is also high. This is fucked. This would be like drawing a triangle like this. You don't draw a triangle like that. You draw a triangle like this, where everything is equal. And the reason for that is because that's what's fun. A hero that, when they get played at their skill ceiling, who incurs more risk, has a higher chance of human error, which means a higher chance of counterplay. There is more player agency against a player like this because it allows for the abuse of human error. Humans will make mistakes, and because of that, it's more fun. So, how do we fix this? It's actually relatively easy. You make more heroes like Genji. However, Genji is in a really bad spot right now because if you play him, it is absolute skill ceiling. You are playing with a ton of risk and almost no value because he's terrible. And the reason for that is because of heroes like Kiriko, who can get a ton of value for no risk. You bring the risk up, you bring the value up in return. That's how it works, because you get value from abusing risk. So, how do you do this? You make it so that heroes have more options. Lucio. Why is it that getting dove by a Lucio is fun, but getting dove by a Kiriko isn't fun? Why? Well, it's because the Lucio had to actively make a decision. For example, if a Lucio is, say, diving a Widowmaker, it means that he's not speeding his Reinhardt anymore. He's not healing his team. He has deliberately went off and pathed himself over to this Widowmaker to fight her, leaving the Reinhardt behind. He made an active decision where he had multiple options and chose one of them. He is losing out on doing this for doing this instead. However, with a Kiriko, if they wanted to fight the Widow, can just simply go and fight Widow and never leave the Rhine at the same time, because she can aimbot heal him across the map while they duel the Widow. And if Kiriko ever gets in danger, she can just left shift or she can press E. Right? These are boring. These are very boring because Kiriko can do both. She's not missing out on anything because she's doing two things at the same time. It's why Lucio's design is fantastic and Kiriko's design is terrible. Right, there we go. That's the video. That was as bare bones explanation as I can give to help people understand why heroes that rely on reactivity are more boring than heroes that rely on proactivity. Because typically speaking, proactive heroes incur more risk for their value, meaning that if you play at your skill ceiling, you are potentially getting more value but incurring more risk, which is more fun because there is more human error, and if there is more human error, then there is more chance for counterplay, therefore greater player agency. It's why aimbot healing isn't fun, because there's no human error in it, therefore there's no risk to it, but it's a ton of free value. That's why we complain about things like that. That's why Ana is fun, Kiriko isn't. That's why BAP heal is a little bit more fun, but Lifeweaver heal isn't. Does that make sense? It's why Sleep Dart and Anti are fun in their specific cases. Nade's not a fantastic example because Nade's really boring right now because it does 1,000,000 damage, so you can't ever dive her because you just lose half your health bar because of the fact that there's no more off-tank to peel, but that's a different video entirely. Anyway, I hope that was a good explanation. I hope that made things really easy to understand for some people. Anyway, I love you all. Goodbye. Have a good day. Have a good day. Goodbye. I love you. Goodbye. Have a good day. I love you. Goodbye. Goodbye.